Just to introduce myself, I'm Soraya Sampson. I am the National Program Director for Young People in Recovery, and I am an ally to people in recovery. And I was raised by two people in recovery. So, uh, really excited about this. And Joseph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joseph Green, and I am a father and a partner and a son and a brother and a storyteller and a community activist in many different spaces. I also am a person in long-term recovery, and I am excited to be here to have this conversation with you today.
I love that. I need that kind of intro for myself. Okay, that's awesome. All right, so let's just get right into it. I would love to know about all of this awesome work you do, but let's start with you as a, person. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up? What kind of shaped your beginnings?
I what shaped my beginnings. Um, so it's interesting. I don't typically enjoy, I guess, hearing people's like resume story.
Sure.
And I think that has to do with the fact that I try to teach storytelling as a series of moments that shaped our
Mhm.
values. And so I will answer your question, obviously.
Of
I was
course.
born in DC. My parents are military. And that was the beginning, but of my consciousness and understanding of where I came from. But for it to be, I think, fully contextualized, have to go back a little further.
Mhm.
And speaking of my grandparents, so my mother and father were born in the South and came north as part of the Great Migration, if you will.
Mhm.
And that is a firm part of who I am, and in the good and the bad. In the good, we stick close to home. We family is extraordinarily important.
Mhm.
It was kind of woven into, even through dysfunction, family first. And that was something that has served me, I think, very well in my lifetime. And I still hold true to who I am now. I guess on the needs work or like opportunity side of things, it would be, coming from very poor back from a very poor background. My parents never really had the opportunity or time to think about mental health or
Mhm.
substance use, and or even the idea of substance use disorder, or the idea that mental health was a thing separate from one's physical health.
Mhm.
It When you are in a position of survive all the time, mental health is kind of diminished to willpower,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
so when you have children and your children come up in a slightly more emotionally mature world, you don't necessarily have the language to communicate with them. And so a lot of what you give your children is through your actions and how you deal with stress and pain and trauma, generational trauma, so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
um, coming from the South, coming from a military family, I think the part of the story that's important to our conversation anyway is the fact that it took me many many years to learn the language of emotion, uh, and to find positive ways to deal with pain and stress, creative,
Yeah.
constructive ways to deal with trauma and things of that sort. And so that's where the story begins, because for a lot of my active use, I guess,
Yeah.
it was a reaction to a solution for problems that I didn't have the language to express.
Oh my goodness. I don't know why I'm surprised that you worded that so beautifully, as that is exactly what you do. But oh my goodness. Yeah, I was raised in foster care
Mm,
primarily. And so like yeah, I definitely identify with that as in, mental health was always in the back burner. It was always kind of um saw it as either a willpower thing or like a privilege thing. Like it was just not something that like I had access to, right? And so like now as a young adult, like that's something I'm still working through is like even just like with my partner, learning how to advocate for myself and say, hey, I'm a little anxious right now, right? Or like I,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so like that's so that's so well spoken. So
Where are you from? Just out of
sure,
curiosity.
yeah. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but my
Okay,
family's from New Orleans. So also
gotcha.
uh
Where were you in the foster care system? Up here or down there?
everywhere. Everywhere.
Everywhere. Oh, up and down the. Okay.
All up and down the coast. My mom was
Oh, I didn't know
running.
that. I thought it was like isolated to a state. I didn't
Oh,
realize
it
that
is. It
it was
is.
a
But
national thing.
my mom was running from the law. So we'd go from
Mm,
place to place and then, they'd
gotcha. They catch
so we
her, and
spent
then you would have to.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So then we'd go into
Oh,
that system, right? So, normally it is, but yeah. Yeah, up and down
dig
the
it.
coast, yeah.
Well, thank you for
Um,
sharing that. I know
yeah,
this
of
is
course.
not the
It's a
interviewer turning into the
conversation.
interviewee,
No,
but
it's
just
a
curious when you're
conversation.
talking to somebody. Yeah.
No, of course. All right. So, what inspired you to get into spoken word specifically? What started that?
You know, what, there's a saying. Um, there's a saying that says every person is born twice. No, I'm going to mess this up. You can cut this or you can keep it in because it's funny. I have no idea what the saying is. I was trying to build off of something, but let me just answer your question directly for once, right? When I was in high school, I was the theater kid,
Mm,
and but I also didn't have a clear identity, right? I was a
sure.
theater kid. I was the SEA kid. I played football. I tried pretty much every extracurricular activity that they would let me do. And one year I took my 11th grade year, I took a creative writing class, and my teacher, Mrs. Carmen, was right out of college. I think it was her first year teaching out of
Oh
college,
my
actually.
gosh.
And this was the beginning of the rebirth of spoken word poetry. They hadn't quite broken mainstream, which is to say, not that it actually has, but it hasn't, it wasn't being used in Nike commercials, and it wasn't
Sure.
on HBO yet. So that was still to come, but it was starting to build up in the college scene. And so uh she gave us an assignment to write a spoken word poem, which was, I dabbled in poetry, just being all emo and high schooly and stuff, but the idea that you could write a poem that was meant to be performed hadn't wasn't a concept that I had grasped yet, and it seemed like a
Yeah.
really cool intersection of
Hmm.
who I was at the time. And actually, it was, now that I think about it, it's a really it was probably a really powerful lesson, whether I got it consciously or not, in the intersection of identities
Ooh.
and purposes, because a lot of the work that I do right now is at the intersection of many of the things that I've tried in my life. And
Yeah.
so that was probably the first time that I took one compartmentalized world and the other one and smushed them together. Long story short, I wrote a long ass poem, and she was like, "This is pretty good," and people clapped for me because I was a good performer. And it kind of just stuck in my head, that this is something that I could do. It was fun, but being unimaginative, like suburban unimaginative, like not
Sure.
really understanding what you could be outside of like the 10 jobs that are available to you. Uh, it never dawned on me that it was something I could use to make a living one day. And so it was
Hmm.
just always a hobby until I dropped out of college.
Oh,
And
that's a big
um
decision.
yeah, well, um yeah, it was a decision. It was so in hindsight, maybe it was a big decision. In the moment, I didn't want to be there in the first place, right? I didn't know
Mm,
why I was there. I
okay.
didn't
Yeah.
have a purpose to keep me tied to it. It was just what you did next when you came from where I came from. And
Mm.
so when you walk into something that people take very seriously, I was a theater major in
Oh.
a conservatory program, and so like people were there to do the damn thing, and I
Hmm.
was there to be around people and to I did again all the extracurricular activities. I ran after school, extracurricular theater programs. We had fringe theater programs. I produced shows,
Oh my
and it was
gosh.
an amazing experience. I just never went to class, and so that catches up to you after a while.
Sure.
And I got a job with a theater company, and I was like, well, what do I need a degree for if I'm already doing what they
Yeah.
want to do? So I stepped away. And after a while of being poor doing theater up and down the East Coast and actually most of the country, I decided that if I was going to be broke and do art, I was going to do the kind of art that I wanted
Yeah.
to do, the kind of art that allowed me to express whatever I thought I needed to express at that age. And that's when I got back into spoken word poetry and started taking it seriously. Found out there was a network of colleges that had competitions, and that there was a national competition, and that there was this whole like underground scene.
Yeah.
And I dedicated my life to that for the next 4 to 5 years. We went to the National Poetry Slam a few times, moved to New York because of it, and I guess got my chops as a performer.
Sure.
Um, and then, as it pertains to the world that we're discussing here today, I stopped writing at the height of my addiction, and when I came back home, when I first sought recovery, I had a problem with
Hmm.
poetry or any kind of art because it reminded me of using and made me want to
Yeah.
use and put me back in environments where I had access. And so
Mm,
I separated myself from it for a while. And then a friend of mine passed away, and I was inspired again to write. And it was probably the first time that I can remember where I wrote something that was inspired by a tragedy. And I performed it, and um, I got in front of an audience, and one of the people in the audience actually ran an after school foster care program for
oh
people
wow.
in Fairfax County. And she was like, yeah, would you come and read your poem and tell your story to these young people? She was just trying to get people in there in front of them, Black people,
Yeah.
and who had a positive message and could actually speak to them, especially those who were dabbling and using and thinking about or affected by parents who used, and so on and so forth. And that was the beginning of, I guess that was the second beginning of my writing career, when I
Oh my
realized that
gosh.
my life had lessons that other people could learn from, and that I could further my understanding of the lessons I had already learned by continuing to examine them intentionally through writing and workshops. And then that developed ultimately to what I do now, which is narrative disruption, and which is creating a space for people to challenge problematic narratives about themselves, and the organizations and communities that they exist in, and hopefully creating connectivity through the power of storytelling.
Wow.
I
That's an
talk a lot.
incredible.
I'm sorry. I
No,
do
no,
this
no, no,
often.
no, no. Gosh, no. I'm listening because I'm like enraptured. Like it's not a bad thing at all. Oh my goodness. Like it's just so incredible. I can't even fathom. I'm a big like well, I'm a secret slam poetry fan. As in I like to
Mm,
watch a lot of button poetry videos on YouTube. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I
May I
remember
ask you another question?
sure.
When did you graduate high school?
Uh oh, I'm gonna give myself away. 2015. Yes.
2015. Now, when you say giving myself away, like, oh, you're exposing your youth, or you're
My
exposing your
youth.
age? Okay,
My
good.
youth.
All right, awesome. No, because I was going to get upset if you're like, I'm so
No,
old. I
no, no, no,
graduated
no, no.
2015.
It's the
Um,
opposite for me,
yeah,
working in like a professional field, especially
yeah,
as like a um I'm biracial, so as
yeah,
like a woman of color,
yeah,
it's like one of those little secrets I have. I'm 24. I just turned 24.
yeah.
Um, and that's why. I tend to do a lot of the creative stuff with YPR. I'm getting more into like diversity, equity, inclusion work and like some
Mhm.
of this side of things. So yeah, so but yeah, so I'm very young in this space. So yeah, so as far as like button poetry videos on YouTube and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
you were right for that generation for
yes.
button in there. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly, right where where I fall. So all right, awesome. So kind of in the same vein,
Hmm.
you know, I think myself and a lot of young people are interested in not only pursuing a career in the arts, but maybe even, starting like kind of inventing their own business or like inventing their own um, ways of being change makers, right? But I think when you're at the beginning of that journey, it can be really easy to just be like paralyzed and overwhelmed by all of the things that there are to do or all of the options. So, what's your advice maybe to people in that situation, to young people in that situation? What's a good place to start?
I think I can only speak to my start.
Sure.
And if I were to, and I do consider myself in a space of success, um, and that's a loaded word and it means different things to different people, but I
Sure.
make a living. I enjoy what I do. I feel like I'm contributing positively to society.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm challenged constantly, which keeps me interested in the work that I do. But the issue with creating one's own lane is that there's a certain level of entitlement that we have in our society that Y has to equal X. If I did 4 years of college, then that equals a certain salary and a certain level of opportunity and a certain level of respect. And unfortunately, that is not how it works if you are wanting to forge your own path,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
It's difficult to insert yourself into a system that already exists and attempt to be creative within that system if
Mhm.
you are not at the top of that system, right? Like as an I'm now at a point now as a CEO where I meet other CEOs and they get to say, I want to go left, I want to go right, I don't really care about this, I want to try this, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, and if you can work your way up there, great, right? But for me, I spent 4 years doing free work. I started an after school creative writing program with a friend of mine, a close friend of mine now, here in Northern Virginia, where I spent my high school and actually started out of my old high school.
That's
And
awesome.
we went from one school to 32 schools.
Oh my gosh.
And we did poetry slams. We had we did Louder Than a Bomb here.
Oh my
And before
gosh.
our program was absorbed by another organization in DC, where I then became the director of youth programs. Uh, it was all, we were a 501c3 fiscally,
Sure.
actually, we were just a fiscally sponsored program. But no money ever went into our pockets. Like everything went back into it.
Mhm.
And, but I was a speech and debate coach. And
Oh,
so I got
fun.
a badge for the school that I was working at, which allowed me to walk into every school in the county without anybody asking me any questions. And so, like, we would make relationships with English teachers who dug what we were doing, and they would give us space after school. And I was doing sometimes 2 to 3 schools a day, and
Oh
then
my
going and
gosh.
working nighttime. And then my son was born, and so I had him until 2, and then dropped him
Oh,
off at the daycare, and then did workshops and then went to work where I made money, and then repeat. And,
oh
and
my
it's
gosh.
good though, because I was
Yeah.
a young man, right? Like that's when I'm supposed to be doing
You
that,
got
in
the
my
energy.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's if I like I couldn't, if my family depended on it, I could do it now, but that's not, the work that I want to be doing at 41. At 41, I
No.
want to be building and kind of figuring out how to give back. to young people in a very similar way to, giving my time to have conversations like this where
Sure.
people might be able to learn something that they can use. So long story short, if it doesn't exist,
Hmm.
you're going to have to prove that it works.
Ooh.
And if you believe in it enough,
Mhm.
you're going to have to work harder than somebody who is stepping into something that already exists, right? and
Yeah.
and that is something that you're going to find out very quickly if you're made for. Not everybody's made for it. Every member of my
Yeah.
immediate family is military. Every one of them from 18 on knew exactly where their next paycheck was coming from. And I spent a decade having no idea how I was going to pay rent, but doing really meaningful things to me. And my family members, I don't think they were made for this. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing. And the work that they did
Yeah.
and still do are important. It's just different strokes.
It's
So
different. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
you have to be very careful that you're not in love with the perception of the lifestyle. Because
That's, yeah.
yeah. Oh, I'm my own boss. I'm a CEO. I'm a young whatever. I'm an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Yeah,
There's a
but it
flex
all falls
culture
on your
that's,
shoulders at the end of the
yeah.
month, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and no one's coming. There's
Yeah.
no one. No one's coming to, hopefully, maybe you have this inkling and you have a family that can support you. That'd be wonderful. But for most people, it is they're doing it because they absolutely cannot be managed. Like, I do not want a boss, and so I will try to be an entrepreneur in whatever way I can, or I see this need and I'm going to pursue it no matter what. And so, yeah, I think that there are a lot more small businesses than people think there are.
There are.
There are a lot more hustlers out here than people think there are. There are a lot more gig workers that aren't, Uber drivers out here than
Yeah.
people think they are. But yeah, man, you got to earn that spot.
Hmm. Hmm. I get a lot of questions from friends about, like, starting nonprofits or about,
Mm.
like, anything like that. And one of the answers I always give is that there's a lot more money than people think that there is, right? I think it's really easy when you make like 50K a year to think like that's like, the epitome. But like when you start like looking and researching and avenues to invest in these kind of things in the arts and recovery, there's a lot more funding than people really know there is. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Yeah,
um
no,
yeah.
there's I think so. My wife is in development and has
Ooh.
been for the last, I think the primary, yeah, since she's been in the DC metropolitan area, so for the past 10, 12 years. And I hear a lot and we talk
Sure.
a lot because I chose to leave the nonprofit space. And LMS Voice is a for-profit
Sure.
business. But there is money out there. I think for me, the issue became, how many hands do I
Ooh.
want in my dream?
Ooh.
Right. And
Yeah.
when I was working with the nonprofit, even the one that I started, it was, I'll give you this money, but here's a list of things you have to do. Right.
Hmm.
It's very rarely, I mean, come
It's
on, like in
very
life, it's very
restrictive.
rarely, it's
Yeah.
like, here's some, you just put this towards overhead or whatever you want. Unrestricted funds is not a term you hear very often.
No.
And when you work with young people or you work with humans,
Hmm.
as many people do in the nonprofit space, it's a different proposition, because then you have to figure out, how do I leverage the lived experience of these humans to continue to bring funding in? And in the process of being a nonprofit, I found myself willing to do harm, even though I didn't
Hmm.
realize I was doing the harm in the moment. Right. Let's put these young people out here. Let's do this event. Let's invite all of these people to this event. And then, this is showtime. You got to do your poem. You got to get on stage. You got to work through
Mm.
it. And when you do that, you lose track of why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And this
Yeah.
is where it's weird because you would say that that is caused by capitalism, but at the same time, if I'm the
Yeah.
person who is making the decisions, I have a choice that I
Yeah.
didn't as an independent business that I didn't have as a nonprofit, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No,
Yeah.
no. I think that's oh, I could start a
Yeah,
whole
we could
conversation
go.
about capitalism that I
Yeah.
won't on, my company's dime, but uh, let's not even get into
Yeah,
that.
we'll
But yeah,
chat
no,
again, I'm sure.
I think that's brilliantly worded.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I just have a few more questions. This
Yeah, yeah.
I think you're gonna like. So I think as somebody who works with youth, I started my nonprofit career working with youth. I was a city year AmeriCorps, so I
Hmm.
just I did all that working with schools and such. So I think it's really, really easy for youth to be left out of the recovery conversation. Right.
Hmm.
I think it's really easy for us to talk about like the opioid epidemic and all of these things and really just like completely forget that like young people are part of this, right? Especially when we're talking about like youth under 18, right? Um, why do you think that is? And what do you think that we as a recovery community can do to really prioritize making youth a greater part of that conversation?
Um, why do I think it is? I guess we'll start there. I
Sure.
think it is because it's messy.
Mm,
Um, Being
yeah.
a human is messy, and we have a one size fits all educational system that doesn't allow for a lot of mess.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we want to just pull an example of recently the critical race theory argument that's
Mm,
happening,
yeah.
right? When parents are pitted against the school system by powers that are not actually interested in the healthy development of young people,
Hmm.
it can become very violent, right?
Yeah.
Figuratively and literally.
Hmm.
And when you talk about recovery, when you talk about substance use, the issues tend to stem primarily from the home. And so I can't fully advocate young people having a voice in this space if I, as an adult, haven't fully understood or accepted my responsibility in the problem.
Mm,
Right. And so
yeah.
I do parent meetings all the time, and parents will come and they want to know how to fix their kid. And I flip the conversation immediately. And this is something that the recovery movement, society, whomever you want to, will also need to do before like really getting to the core of this
Yeah.
issue is what do you do to deal with stress and pain and trauma? What examples do you show your children? Are you a do as I say, not as I do type parent, without an explanation as to what it is you're doing,
Hmm.
thusly creating a space of hypocrisy between you and your child, which
Hmm.
grows cynicism, and now your child doesn't listen to you, but you don't understand why. And then they, as young people do, will do the thing that you tell them not to do. Right. That's a
Hmm.
human response to a thing.
Yeah.
It seems to
Yeah.
be stronger in young people. But and so the recovery movement needs to do a couple of things. One, talk to parents,
Hmm.
right? They need to get parents involved in the conversation. Two, they need to redefine what recovery means. And this is a
Mm,
big answer.
yeah.
Um, and but I can sum it up, I guess,
Sure. Yeah.
because I've been talking about this a lot recently. Um, there's a stigma around substance use,
Yes.
but there's also a stigma around recovery.
Yes.
Um, I didn't get into recovery as soon as I would have liked because of my perception of what recovery was. And it was this dingy, church basement with a bunch of
Oh,
white dudes sitting around complaining about the crappy things they've done with their life, because that's what the media has
that's
shown me.
yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think about people of color. I definitely didn't think about young people. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that the moment I, like, even though I had admitted I had a problem to myself, the moment I tried to deal with it would be the end of any pleasure, joy, or fun in my life. Right. And I couldn't deal with that idea. Right. I also, as someone in recovery, you're adjacent, but I'm sure you and your position have met plenty of us. If you're being honest with yourself, when you stop doing whatever it is you were doing, you mourn it. It is the
Yeah.
loss of a friend. It
Yeah.
is the loss of how you dealt with the part of your humanity that you couldn't deal with. And when that's gone, it's scary. And so we have to open ourselves up to many pathways. We have to open ourselves up to letting young people lead in the recovery movement so that young people see
Yeah.
young people. If you need to be, what's the word? AA stands for anonymous. Thank
Alcoholics.
you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
anonymous. Yeah.
Anonymous was the word I was looking for. If you need to be anonymous in your recovery, great. But don't knock other people who want to be loud in their recovery.
Sure.
Because I perform on stage in front of people, thousands of people at this point in my career, and I don't even know where my videos online go to, but I keep meeting people as I go across the country. I keep meeting people who know me before I get there, and or feel like they know me after I've made my presentation, and they come and they
Mm-hmm.
say, I needed that. Our light, if I may paraphrase
Yeah.
one of my favorite poems, our light gives other people permission to shine. And people are out there afraid of being their truest selves, their best versions of themselves, because that is also their most exposed version of themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. I'm going to stop there because it was going all over the place, but bang,
No,
bang,
that was a
two
great
things.
answer. Awesome, awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tipping the pain scale, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so we've been really involved with this. I'm really excited. I watched it like last year, like before,
Nice.
yeah, like I was like, as soon as we got the special passwords, I was like so excited. So, you were in that film.
I
What was
am.
that like? And yeah, what was that experience like for you?
It's interesting. I've had to reflect on that a lot over the past 24 hours.
Hmm.
There's an event that I get to be a part of where I am facilitating the cast of Dope Sick in a conversation
Ooh.
about using art as a means to bring light to this issue and advocacy in general through art.
Sure.
And I find that this movie is, as someone who teaches artistic activism to young people, like, this movie is artistic activism.
It is, yeah.
And it's purest, because
Hmm.
it's not even, it's not, it is storytelling, but it is true stories,
Yeah.
and the people get to tell it themselves. And so
Hmm.
I am extraordinarily proud to be a part of this. And it's interesting because that pride came after completion of the project,
Sure. Yeah.
which is to say that going into the project, I had no idea what was happening.
Yeah.
You get a phone call from Greg Williams, who I had met previously a couple of times, and then someone says, "Hey, I've made 2 movies. I'm making a 3rd one. Do you want to be in it?" And you think to yourself, "Man, I've been waiting for this phone call,"
Yeah.
and
What a
that's
phone
because I've
call.
seen other people be in these films and their careers take a next level,
Yeah.
right? Because of the exposure of the film. And for me, I'd been in this space where, like, I can eloquently explain it to people. Additionally, if you have some association with what I do, you can get it. But for the most part, it's a smile and nod
Yeah.
conversation that I
Yeah.
have with most humans about the work that I do. Like, oh, that sounds great. Do you get
Yeah.
paid for that? And so to know that someone was going to follow me do this work was both very
Hmm.
intimidating, but also ultimately I'm like, yo, if you stick this landing, you're not going to have to explain it anymore. You're going to be
Yeah.
able to show it, right? And So it was the experience itself was amazing. Once I talked to Jeff Riley, who's the director, I knew that I was in good hands. Still didn't know what it was
Yeah.
going to look like, but you just know. I mean, I've been around the industry enough that I think I can sniff out when people are disingenuous. And Jeff seems the exact opposite of that. He's not in it for the limelight. He's not in it for the fame. If you look at his other projects, he's not in it as to exploit his way to the top. He wants to tell real stories. And so I trusted him with my family. He came in and they filmed me making dinner with my family. My wife was still pregnant at the time. My youngest son was there. He has young children, so he had a great time with them. And then we went out and did the Knoxville shows. And I don't remember them even being there. Like, I know they were there, but I don't remember, like, as I'm shaking hands with kids in the movie,
sure,
like, I'm not aware that there's a camera right beside my head. And that's
that's good documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it wasn't small cameras either.
No,
I mean, they had a freaking Ari, like, it's a giant camera. But they did a wonderful job with the story at the end. And I think the most after the fact proud thing that I am with the film is the representation of people of color in the movie.
Yes.
And I had no idea. I was so accustomed to being the Black guy in the recovery community that when I saw that there 5 of the 7 people who were, the subjects of the film were people of color, like, my jaw dropped. And
I was shook.
Yeah. And then my shoulders got a little higher. It's like, as I was walking around, because I knew I was going to
carry so much weight.
Black communities and, like, say, yo, I did this project, and look, we are part of the solution. And and as somebody who spends the greatest enemy to love in this world is cynicism, right? And if my job is to create love through connection, through storytelling, through art, and to empower young people, but all people, the cynicism is the thing that's in the way. And so when a movie comes out, and maybe all the people in the movie are white, but they were all doing really great work. But how am I going to get somebody who's not white to watch this movie and care? Right? Because we can, on an intellectual level, talk all we want to about, we should be able to examine the work for its validity, and not because of the but if representation didn't matter, they wouldn't be screaming about the Little Mermaid.
That's what I was just gonna say. I was just gonna bring up
if it didn't matter to you, if it wasn't important, if it didn't,
if it matter,
if it wasn't a thing, you wouldn't be so upset. And that's crazy to me that I can't explain that to people. Like, the fact that you're pissed off right now is how an entire population of people have felt for 100 years. Right? The idea that when at the end of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, my son, who was 6 at the time, jumped out of his seat and started dancing to that song at the end, and was so empowered by seeing himself in that film. And I'm just sitting there. My mom was with me. I'm sitting there. We're crying. It's just like, what is going on right now? And just to think about all of the people who would have felt like a superhero 30 years ago, right? 50 years ago. We just spread the love a little bit. And that's what it is. It's not about taking something, just spread the love a little bit. So anyway.
No, that was oh my goodness. Yeah. I
could go there. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have time to go there.
I do a lot of goodness gracious. All right. So two more quick questions. So one, let's talk about next. What's next for you? So if you were given $1 million and no rules, what would you want to do with it?
I mean, first, buy a home.
Yeah. That would be my first one.
Yeah, and I think there's a misconception of how selflessness works. My my family being secure and me knowing where, at the very least that, for the next 50 years that we're going to have a roof over our head, frees me to do more work for the world.
Yeah.
Right. It's a form of self-care because it's a part of my brain that's constantly thinking about it that I don't have to worry about anymore, that I can put towards something else.
Well,
So
you're
I would
also
I would do
freeing
that.
up. Yeah, people also don't consider that when you buy a home, you're freeing up affordable renting housing for somebody who
For
might not
other
be
people
able to
too.
afford to
Yeah.
buy a home,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Take it.
that's
Yeah.
another
Take it there. Go
topic,
ahead.
but
Let's
there we go. That's also a
let's
thing.
go there.
Okay.
We should invite my wife into this conversation. We
If you
can
can
go
afford
into
to
this.
buy a home. Okay. Jeez.
Yeah. So that's we want to get off the grid a little bit. We want to
Sure.
buy a home, but that home would also be a recording studio. Like right now, this is the basement of my house, and I've turned it into a recording studio, which will allow us to continue to do our work, no matter where we are in the country, as far as like filming videos, doing live presentations. Now that I think, this type of communication is here to stay. And then I do this thing called narrative disruption, which are these workshops, and it changes depending on the audience. For some folks, it's an advocacy workshop, taking their lived experience and turning into advocacy. For some people, it's being able to speak their story to their family for the first time. For some people, it's about we have this wonderful organization with this beautiful mission, but we're starting to lose touch with who we are. And we need to be able to use our stories, value-based storytelling, as a way to reconnect with ourselves and with our purpose. And it's quickly forming itself to be, I think, my life's work. And so we've been doing this. I have a partner, her name is Rosie. We've been doing this, Rosie Greenberg. We've been doing this work, and now it's growing to a point where like she'll be doing it over here, and then I'll be doing it over there. And we're probably going to train some more people to do it. And it's the greatest gift I think I could give the world. And so I would invest in that infrastructure of storytelling as a integral part of our culture. And
I love
that's what
that.
I would do with $1 million.
I love that. I think I'm a big history buff, and I think people forget that for most of human history, we told history through myth and through story, right? It was a blend of true and fantasy. And then it was very recently in human history that we started just like recording the events as they are, right? Which is, fine and good. But I think people forget that storytelling is so integral to who we are as a human race, right?
Even the news, I would love for there to be way more story based news broadcasting than this happened, no context.
Could we highlight some creators? Could we highlight some cool new project, that kind of all right. And last question,
even in like someone died over here, like, all right, well, who are they? What do they care about? Who was the shooter? What do they care about? What got them in this situation? What were they fighting for? Because people just don't go shooting each other for the sake of shooting each other. Like there's so much context that's left out of our discourse.
Maybe that's why people like true crime. Like I love to watch like true crime on YouTube, but I love when it's like an hour about like who was this person, what led up to this, what happened after. Like I want the whole context, and that's really popular, I think, compared to just hearing about like, oh, this crime happened. Like, no, I want to know, like,
But that type of long form, as NPR will say, that type of long form, they're doing their earning their fundraising week. So you get to hear a news story, but then you also get to hear how hard it was to make that news story and how much money it costs. And the fact of the matter is, it's true. It costs a lot of money to do narrative work well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Not anyway, but you said there's one more. Was that the last
one
one?
more. So I know that I am very interested in connecting with you and hearing more about your work. Where do people go to find that information?
Yeah. It's real simple.
How do they connect with you?
Yeah. Let's go to www.lms, as in Larry, Mary, and Sam, voice.com. there you will find three things. One is the LMS Storytellers Work website, which is where we are in the beginnings of describing this work that we're doing as narrative disruption, but it talks about our workshops and what we do when we go out into the world. And then there's a free curriculum work site called LMS Curriculum, which is sort of the culmination of Brian Hannon, which is my partner in starting the
Awesome.
poetry after school programs. It is our culmination of all of the work that we did over the last 7 years. And so there's about 120 free writing workshops
Oh, wow.
and essay workshops for young people. You know, I would say seventh grade to whenever.
Cool.
And it's based off of contemporary poetry, 95% poets of color. And in addition to that, every month we interview one of those poets at LMS Chat, which is
Ooh.
a long form interview podcast that if you go to the website and sign up, you'll get an invitation to. This month we are interviewing Franny Choi. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, super exciting. And then lastly, LMS Studio, which is where we use video to tell stories and disrupt
Awesome.
harmful narratives with different nonprofits and organizations that that see the world in a way that we can get behind. And then Instagram is real simple, Joseph LMS Voice.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so, so, so much for your time. And it was just really great meeting you. I'm definitely gonna, explore, and I hope we connect again
Yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah,
professional capacity. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I'm gonna reach out and a
yeah.
sidebar. I would love to, but yeah. So, thank you so much.
No
Honestly,
problem.
it's so great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I look forward to hearing how this turns out and being a
Yes,
part of the new YPR
thank you.
revolution.